2022 Denver Broncos. Finally getting to the previews for this next year. Really, really excited, especially to start with a team that went through one of the biggest changes that we've seen. And that is the Denver Broncos. Of course, going from some would call subpar quarterback play to something that I believe is one of the best in the league. Really, really excited to talk about this. Starting with last year, though, obviously not a great year. Really, really mediocre, to be honest with you. Another story with the Broncos they've gotten used to as far as having a really high-end defense and an offense that just could not score. It was torpedoing them really badly, and that's kind of what they get, when you run out Teddy Bridgewater and especially Drew Lock at quarterback. Those two guys gone now. Alongside Bobby Massey, a player I like and I think is a quality starter. Not a huge deal, though, especially with what they have on the team. Noah Fant going the other way in the Russell Wilson trade, as well as Shelby Harris on the other side. Two players I like a lot, especially Shelby Harris. Kyle Fuller came over, was a disappointment last year. They won't miss him too much. I still have faith in him, I think, as going forward, but, whatever. It is what it is. Bryce Callahan, A.J. Johnson, positive defenders. But they also get rid of Shamar Stephen, Kenny Young, two guys that I don't value very highly at all. And they bring in Russell Wilson. Personally, I think Russell Wilson's one of the absolute best quarterbacks in the NFL. I think in my list going into last year, I had him at number 2 just behind Aaron Rodgers off the top of my head. Maybe, I'm sure Mahomes was there too. But the point is, I think really, really highly of Russell Wilson, and he has been held back for a very long time at this point by basically playing football from like the 70s. The Seahawks have had the worst offenses in football schematically for basically his whole career. And that's especially become prevalent in the last 5 years where they just refuse to adjust and refuse to learn and get better with new offensive concepts despite the rest of the league, even the worst offensive teams going in that direction. Moving away from that should help Russell Wilson a ton. And that applies here specifically because they're getting Nathaniel Hackett as their new head coach, but more importantly, probably offensive play caller, coming over from the Packers. Now, I don't love Nathaniel Hackett. And I don't think he's, this McVay, Shanahan. He's not at the top end of the league, but he's certainly somebody who has embraced some of the modern aspects of football. And he runs much, much more positive value things than the Seahawks with Russell Wilson or even the Broncos have in a long time. So that's definitely a good start. He also brings over Billy Turner with him from the Packers. Not a player I like a lot as a starter at tackle, but he does offer some things we'll talk about. Defensively, Bless Austin, Alex Singleton, role players I like. Randy Gregory, a really good player. DJ Jones, J.R. Reed, not so much, but we'll talk about them when we get to the defense. Starting with the entirety of the offense. Again, the most important part, and what's going to determine if this Broncos team can really play with the big boys, especially in the AFC West this coming year, is what Russell Wilson does in a new offense. Some people might be worried about that. I'm really not. I think we've seen more than enough in his career that when he has even decent offensive play calling, especially you remember the beginning of 2 years ago when he was I believe he had most yards, most touchdowns, everything, best passer rating in the league for an extended period of time before the Seahawks did what they do, pulled everything back, and lost a bunch of games because they don't know how to coach football. So, starting with the offensive line, really, really good. You're talking about 3 out of 5 players that are, I think, really highly rated at their positions. Garrett Bowles has been good for a long time. He had his holding issues people are going to call up, but over the last 2 years, those have kind of evaporated. And even when he had them, I think he's a guy who rarely gets beat in bad ways, especially quick off the line of scrimmage. He can move fine as a run blocker. He can push fine, but more importantly, as a pass protector or tackle, you're getting what you need out of Garrett Bowles. Dalton Risner, Graham Glasgow, 2 players I think really highly of. Dalton Risner's awesome. Can basically do everything. Graham Glasgow, I think, was clearly playing hurt for a lot of last year. He was one of the best guards in football prior to that on the Lions, and I think you even saw by the end of the season that he kind of got back to at least similar to that form. And I think going forward, I'm still looking at him as a really positive player. Lloyd Cushenberry at center, he's slow. He is, and he's not a great pass protector. He's definitely not bad, and if he's your weakest link on an offensive line, you're going to live with that for sure. But still a player that I'm not in love with. And before we talk about this other tackle spot, I think something to note with all of these offensive linemen is it will be interesting to see if they can transition to a new running scheme. All these guys have been playing this really straightforward, downhill, double at the point of attack type of thing for the last couple of years. That's going to change. What the Packers do, they do a lot more modern stretch running. Guys need to move out of their zones. They need to climb to the second level immediately and actually engage with linebackers. And while I think the players we have here have shown that they can do that, it's not been something that's done a ton in their careers. And that's something that, especially with Lloyd Cushenberry, I'm a little bit worried about because a lot of those run games are centered on having a really athletic center who can get out in space and cause damage at the second level of defenses, which they don't really have here. All that to say, I still have faith in their run game, and at the very least, they're going to provide push at the point of attack. That other tackle spot. Now, this is really interesting. Billy Turner, like I said, I don't like him particularly. I think he's pretty vulnerable in pass protection, especially to the high-end speed rushers we have in the NFL. But outside of that, he is somebody that's regularly, I think, performed better than I think of him. And he does, similar to those other guys, really push the line of scrimmage. Other than him, though, I'm actually really excited about Calvin Anderson. He didn't play a ton. He's, I think, a third-year player at this point. He started and played all of 2 games last year, came in for another one. And if you haven't heard that name before, obviously I understand that. But he was pretty damn good, especially the Cowboys game last year, playing against Randy Gregory, someone we're going to talk about on the other side of the ball. He showed that he could get to the right spots very consistently. He was almost never an issue in pass protection. And frankly, I would be shocked if he isn't the starting right tackle for this team based on what I've seen. I think he's really good. Or not really good, but I think he has the potential to be a really solid player. Cam Fleming's horrible. They just re-signed him, I think, yesterday, maybe today. Not a fan of that. Just shouldn't really be in the NFL at this point. Maybe a swing tackle, whatever. But I'm not super worried about that. I think they know that and are planning on starting him. Quinn Bailey played okay in limited snaps, but whatever. The only other guy that's important, I think, to talk about on the offensive line is Quinn Miners. He was fine last year. He did show at times that he could get locked into defenders and really get them out of the hole wherever they were going. He does run okay. He can get moving if he gets to top speed. He just showed me something last year that I get really concerned about, and this is with all offensive linemen, that's he really struggled to stay on his feet at times. And that's something that's really common among the worst offensive linemen in football, is it's really hard to do your job when you're on the ground, and Quinn Miners ended up on the ground a lot. Now, he was a rookie, and he could get a lot better, and like I said, there are things I like, but some people are excited about him. I'm not so much. Offensive weapons-wise, this team is really, really interesting, I think. So where are we going to start here? So we'll get the running backs out of the way quick. Melvin Gordon played a lot better last year than I expected from him. He actually showed that, when he just does his job, goes forward basically when he's told to, he gives a reasonable running back. Now, he's never really going to be one who creates a ton of plays. He's not going to add value compared to other running backs around the league. Whatever. That's fine. You don't really need that to be a successful NFL offense. Javonte Williams definitely flashed more of that, and he clearly has the contact balance and explosiveness that you want more from the running back position, but he's still wasn't amazing. He wasn't consistently breaking tackles or consistently hitting holes really hard. So while I do think he's good, and I do think he's the better of the two, especially going forward, not somebody that I'm in love with. Mike Boone's a really, really good backup, but whatever. At wide receiver, so Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, and KJ Hamler, they're the important ones. And something that you have to remember with wide receivers when they play with Russell Wilson is that Russell Wilson operates in a really specific way that can make some receivers struggle and some really, really good. That way is that he will make his first read really quickly, right? And if it's open, he has no problem throwing this all the time. It's part of the reason he's great. If it's not open, then he interacts with the rest of a play different than any quarterback in the NFL does. And that's because he doesn't really run the rest of the play, right? He will take his eyes down, survey the pocket immediately, figure out where there is a problem or not, and then he's going to attack that soft spot on the line to create space to find somebody breaking downfield. Now, with the Seahawks, there ended up being 4 or 5 weak spots in front of him, which is why he looks so bad sometimes. With this team, as I already talked about in the offensive line, I think that's a lot less likely, which is really, really positive value. But what you are looking for with Russell Wilson, somebody's going to win really quickly or who's going to win hard on the second break. So keep that in mind as we talk about those receivers. The first one I'm going to talk about is Jerry Jeudy. I really highly thought a first-round pick, of course, from a few years ago, and he has shown at times why he was thought that highly of. He does some of the things that these really high-end receivers do at times as far as getting open fairly quickly, being able to separate in a meaningful way. And he has shown at least a little bit after the catch as far as being a useful receiver. Now, I don't think he's been nearly at the high end that people expected of him. And while, like I said, he does flash those things, it's not like he's out here cooking people with regularity. Now, he went through a ton of injuries last year, too. And I do still have hope for him as being a good player for sure. It's just he's a little weak at the point of attack or where the ball is. He's not great after the catch. And like I said, it's not like he's out here dusting people. He's just pretty good. Tim Patrick, I have to apologize too. My receiver rankings from last year, I had him like at the bottom almost, and I was just flat out wrong. He was way better than I thought he was. He was way better as far as a separator than I thought he was. He's not great at that, but when you combine his large frame, his ability to track the ball down the field, as well as being a average separator, that's all you need to have a competent, useful NFL receiver, and that's where I was just wrong. He's just better as a route runner, separator than I thought he was. But what you do have it with him this year going forward is a useful player. Now, he's not great. He's not going to, again, beat people consistently. He's not going to be able to cross corners' faces. He's not going to create a ton of separation after the catch. He's pretty mediocre at that point. But not everybody needs to do all those things. He does provide a skill set that is useful. KJ Hamler, okay, Cortland Sutton. So we'll do Cortland Sutton now. He's a fairly big name in the NFL. But personally, I don't feel like Cortland Sutton is a particularly useful NFL player. The reason being, his main skill set, is contested catches, and he is absolutely really good at that. The problem is that is one of the least useful skill sets to be good at in the NFL, which might sound funny, but think about it, right? How often do contested catches like jump balls really happen? It's really infrequent, and when they do, it's not like we're talking about someone who wins like 80% of them, right? He's one of the better ones, and he still maybe hypothetically wins like 55% of jump balls as opposed to like 51% for other players, which when you combine that with the infrequency of that actual situation happening, it's not that useful of a skill set, especially when combined with a guy who just doesn't get open. Cortland Sutton's really slow. He's really laterally slow. And that creates a ton of issues, especially against any real corners. It's not like he's particularly physical in his routes the way that like a DK Metcalf is, that people are going to want to compare to him with the Russell Wilson transition. But he's just not even close to that level of player. And while he will still provide a outlet as far as a deep ball guy, and somebody who is large and can get first downs theoretically on contested catch type situations, that's just not that useful, and I think a lot of other guys just do that better than him. Then KJ Hamler. Now, KJ Hamler, on the other hand, is someone I'm really excited about. Not because I think he's particularly great himself, but because I think he works really well with Russell Wilson, which is why I talked about what I talked about earlier. And I'm going to compare him to Tyler Lockett for that. Now, Tyler Lockett's way better, don't get me wrong. But Tyler Lockett and him are similar in the way that their main skill set is being unbelievably quick and or fast once plays break down, which is the best thing you can do with Russell Wilson. That's why Tyler Lockett was always so good. He's not particularly good as a route runner or separator, all that stuff in the initial route tree, but he is probably the best in football as far as, okay, the play's broken, I'm finding space, I'm getting open. I literally think he's the best in football at that. KJ Hamler has a lot of those similar tendencies. Now, he's not going to be as good at it, but that is something that works really well with Russell Wilson that I'm pretty excited about. And then the tight end, you're moving from Noah Fant to Albert Okwuegbunam. I actually think you're basically the same. Noah Fant was a little bit better, but as a first-round pick, it's not like he ever showed that he was this monster tight end who demanded a lot of targets. He was just an athletic guy who, once he ran the routes, if he was open, he could catch the ball and do some work. Useful player, for sure, but not somebody that particularly affects the outcome of an offense over the course of the year. And Albert Okwuegbunam, like I said, he's fairly similar. He's really fast with straight line, too. He has good hands contested, and while he's not as athletic, especially laterally, kind of so what is my reaction to that. They also draft Greg Dulcich, a guy that I liked in college a lot. I'm not going to talk too much about rookies just because I think there's not a lot of point. Everybody's wrong about them going to the NFL anyway. So, whatever. But it's cool still. And then we got Eric Saubert, good third blocking 10. I actually like him. So how does this offense look as a whole? Well, I would be surprised if they're not really good as far as year-end stats go. Russell Wilson combined with a positive offense it's going to lead to a ton of positive outcomes. He's going to find a lot of space, especially with his good offensive line in front of him, where even if there is one, breakdown, even per play, Russell Wilson beats that or interacts with that better than any other quarterback in the NFL. So you're fine. And especially if Nathaniel Hackett can provide even a baseline of offensive help with the play calling, you're looking at a really positive outcome. Now, it's not quite as good as what I talked about last year going into this season with the Rams and Matthew Stafford. I talked about how that was going to work out incredibly well if you go back and look at my videos, because you're combining a player who creates the high end of plays with a coach who raises the floor of your offense, right? And you do get a similar effect here. It's just worse coach, better quarterback. And you could argue they might work out better. I just have issues with the consistency of it, which I think is really going to be the difference, especially when you combine or you compare like the receivers' weapons on the Rams with these on the Broncos. There are going to be games where this team kills people, 100%. There's going to be a lot of games where they're really good. But this team is a lot more prone as constructed to poor offensive outings than like the Rams last year were. And it's mostly because the receivers just aren't consistently going to be getting open the way that those other teams are. Now, Jerry Jeudy could fix that. He could get a lot better and fix that. Maybe KJ Hamler, who also dealt with injuries, comes in and changes that a lot. But with these big, kind of old-school contested catch receivers on the outside, you're just going to run into that, which is part of their problem last year, too. For as well as especially Tim Patrick played, it's not like Teddy Bridgewater's that bad, and he wasn't solely, even close to solely at fault for a lot of those issues. But it is what it is. Then we go to the defense. So with the defense, you're still looking at a really, really good team. This was, I think, like the third best defense in the NFL last year. Now, I do want to point out that Vic Fangio is one of the absolute best defensive coaches in football. He added a ton of value on that side of the ball, and he is gone. Their new defensive coordinator is a guy who comes from that system. I think he was actually on the Rams last year, but really similar as far as this solid zone defense that doesn't let people behind them, as well as being aggressive near the line of scrimmage, which is one of the better ways you can play defense, I think, in the modern NFL. But you can't until he does it. I'm not going to go ahead and guarantee he's as good as Vic Fangio because I think it's pretty unbelievably unlikely. But let's talk about the players. So the front three, still really good. So you lose Shelby Harris, one of my favorite players personally, but whatever. We're still talking about Draymond Jones, who's criminally underrated, really, really good player. Maybe he's not as elite as like Shelby Harris was. He's not at this top 10 defensive tackle, but he's still somebody who makes a lot of plays. He gets in the backfield a lot. He can move really well. Mike Purcell, one of the better run-only nose tackles in the NFL, and Deshaun Williams, a player who played really well last year. Not a huge name and not a huge impact, but he's definitely good enough to be a positive player. The depth is what's different this year for their front three as opposed to before. That concerns me. McTelvin actually was fairly useful for parts last year. I do think there are signs that he's going to be a fairly good player. But as a run defender, he's still kind of whatever, and it's not like he was this dominant run pass rusher. DJ Jones I bring in, I don't really understand why. DJ Jones benefited from playing with a ton of talent in the 49ers front seven for a very long time. And while he might not be he's not as bad as like Shamar Stephen was last year, for example, he's just a player who doesn't do a lot, gets pushed around a lot, and doesn't really make plays, which concerns me. Especially when you talk about last year having 5-6 good defensive tackles versus now, you have 2, maybe 3. That can be tough. At corner, we'll stay on the front seven. At edge, you still have Bradley Chubb. I know he didn't have a sack last year. He was hurt for a long time. I still believe in him personally as far as a above-average edge. I never thought he was a high-end pass rusher. He's still not going to be. But he's somebody who can provide a little bit of power rush from the edge, collapse the pocket a little bit, and more importantly is going to be a solid, strong edge run defender, which is kind of the theme with this team. Malik Reed does that in spades. He's just an effort rusher, but he provides really good run support. Jonathan Cooper, kind of the same thing, especially for a 7th-round pick last year, was decent as a rookie. Again, never somebody I think is going to be a relevant pass rusher, but he can play a little bit. Then we get Randy Gregory. I think really highly of Randy Gregory. He should have played more on the Cowboys, frankly, last year, especially kind of what happened with Alvin Smith went down. But he is somebody who just creates a lot of problems for an offense. He consistently beats players at the line of scrimmage. He's not going to dominate them the way that a Watt brother does or something like that, but he'll win. He'll hold the point of attack actually pretty well. He's strong despite his kind of thinner frame. And he has the athleticism to actually make plays. Huge fan of Randy Gregory. They also draft Nick Benito in the second round again. I don't like commenting on rookies just because they're so random and how good they are, but theoretically he is the type of player that I think they're missing as far as a speed rusher. At inside linebacker, this is definitely the weakness of this team. Josie Jewell comes back from injury. He's fine as a player. Again, he's not somebody who really matters in that he's not going to make plays. He's not going to be a positive value for the defense, I don't think. But he can play and start, and he's never going to be the reason your defense is bad, I don't think. And then probably Baron Browning is the other starter who played a ton last year. At first, I kind of thought he sucked, to be frank with you. He was somebody who got out of the gate really, really slow. He just seemed to struggle to read NFL offenses. Everything was 2-3 steps late. He was getting buried on the backside of plays. However, as the year went on, he definitely changed my opinion. I still don't think he's particularly notable, but he doesn't suck. He has some athleticism. He actually was able to get to the edge a lot better. He was definitely firing, quicker, which is to be expected as a rookie. He's learning how to play, obviously, but not everybody does that. So credit to him for getting into the flow of the NFL. And again, as a starter, I don't think you're screwed if he's out there. They also bring in Alex Singleton, a player I'm a fan of, as a backup linebacker. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up starting here, though, either. Not a high-end player, but he doesn't make mistakes. I actually think he's better in pass coverage than a lot of linebackers are, especially mentally. And he can do his run fits. He can get in the line of scrimmage fine. Justin Stranad's also there. I think he's actually bad, but whatever. He shouldn't be playing anyway. Then we talk about the secondary, right? So you still have Ronald Darby as your number one corner. Ronald Darby's good. He's another one I kind of owe apology to compared to last year because I thought he was somebody who got burned a lot more deep than he actually does. And partly maybe that's the schemes that he's been playing. And I do still think he has that in him to be a little more risky than he should be. But that's not always a bad thing. And Ronald Darby can definitely play, whatever you want to say. He's a player who can stick with guys in main coverage, which is really valuable in the NFL. Patrick Surtain. Patrick Surtain, Broncos fans might be mad at me, I guess. I'm not totally sure what they think of him. I definitely don't think he sucks, so I'm going to get that out of the way. But last year, he plays a ton of really soft off coverage. Now, part of that is the scheme as far as the zones they were running, especially if they're outside corners, but he was even doing way more so than Darby or even Kyle Fuller was. And while he is good at that, and I think that's partly just what they teach at Alabama when he was there, it does lead to a lot of easier completions than I think he should be giving up for a player as talented as he seems. And maybe he'll get better at that. I actually would bet that he would, but it's not something I'm going to guarantee until I see it. As of now, he's still a little bit of a thinner guy who is giving up easier completions and kind of concerns me after the catch against some of these bigger, better receivers. Now, I'm not talking about like Courtland Sutton. I'm still talking about the high end. I'm talking about A.J. Brown or like DK Metcalf, that type of thing. But he's still good. He could still be a starting outside corner in a really good defense. He literally just was last year as a rookie. They also bring in Bless Austin, a player I think pretty highly of, especially as a rotational corner. Not great, but he's somebody you can definitely play. Michael Ojemudia, he comes back from basically a whole missed year. Him, not so much. I think he's bad, just like actively bad, especially now. He was a rookie, but 2 years ago when they were leaning on him a lot, he was just giving up yards faster than you could count. I mean, he was just really, really bad. Now, corner play is known to go up and down, so he could get better, sure. And I don't think he's really going to play. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not the fourth corner on their depth chart. But if he gets on the field, I would be really concerned. I think of anything on this board is the main thing. And maybe this is the one, too, with the slot corner. K'Waun Williams, I actually think he's really similar to Bryce Callahan in a lot of ways, the player they just lost. Both guys, I think, are two of the 5 best slot corners in the NFL. K'Waun Williams has been awesome for a really long time. He's undersized, but he sticks with guys really well. He plays run support awesome for a guy his size. And overall is just a really good player. Isai Basie, on the other hand, another guy 2 years ago when the Broncos were kind of leaning on rookie younger corners, came in, played, and was absolutely horrible. Could he get better again? Sure, but he's undersized, and it shows up way more than K'Waun Williams ever does. I'm really concerned about him. I just don't think he has the athleticism to be on an NFL field. Is he going to play? Hopefully not if you're the Broncos, but that is another area of concern. Their safeties are still amazing, some of the best in the NFL. Justin Simmons, A+, super, super good player, makes up for a lot of stuff, isn't just a free safety, actually can make plays around the line of scrimmage. Kareem Jackson's one of the most underrated players in the league, constantly around the ball, doesn't get beat in coverage in any meaningful way. He will trigger really quickly. I think super highly of Kareem Jackson. He missed some time with injury last year, too. They definitely missed him. He's back. That's awesome. They also have Caden Stearns, a guy who showed some stuff as like a matchup tight end cover guy last year. Not super high on him. I don't think he is necessarily positive, but he showed that he can play at least a little bit. And for a rookie last year, that's in a lot of ways all you can ask for. So this team is, I think, set up potentially for a lot of success, because they have Russell Wilson at quarterback, right? And then they have changes on the offense in a way that Russell Wilson's really never had before as far as like a consistent positive outlook on the offensive side of the ball. That should lead to really, really positive things. For all this stuff I'm talking about, how I don't think their wide receivers are necessarily all that good, it shouldn't. There's a real chance it just doesn't matter because Russell Wilson is so good. Now, I can't guarantee that, and something that Russell Wilson and those receivers I think contribute to is that their offense could easily just go missing for like a week, 2 weeks, even maybe 3 weeks if they're playing these better defenses. But it's not something that I'm crazy concerned about, and the high end is going to look amazing. When you combine that with the defense that I think is clearly still really talented, you should overall have a recipe for a really, really good team. Their defense also missing, high-end pass rush. I'm a little bit worried about their corners, especially their corner depth. There are a lot more areas to attack this year than there were last year or the year before. But overall, you're still talking about a team that should be clearly in the contention, even in that really, really tough AFC West. So you're looking forward to a lot, Broncos fans.